This week, the other side goes nuclear. Enough with playing politics and money-making games with Australia's energy future and our national security. Reliable, safe energy is about a hell of a lot more than reaching net zero. If we're not careful, we'll end up with net zero economy, net zero jobs, and net zero defence. We'll give you the data and the facts as we explore whether it makes sense for Australia to bring nuclear power into its energy mix in a special episode. G'day Perth, g'day Alice Springs, and g'day Australia. Welcome to episode 305 of The Other Side for the weekend commencing Friday, March the 15th, 2024. I'm Damian and welcome back to Australia's best take on the news and commentary of the week without the woke to get you smart for the weekend. We're a sensible centre-right leaning show flapping about in Australia where the left-wing parties have gone full-blown socialist and the supposed right-wing party follows nervously behind, trying not to look too right-wing and being too scared to stand up for, well, anything really. We know what we believe in. We believe in silly old-fashioned Aussie values like personal responsibility, small government, supporting small business, and contributing to the community by being productive and working hard and not letting the tyrants in government take our money from us. We welcome your support and your occasional disagreement, so long as you enjoy the show. Before we go completely nuclear, I promised you that we'd be keeping you updated on the two secrecy stories that we've been following on the other side. First, there was the secret member of an Australian parliament who spied on our country for a foreign government. No names, no info, just that lovely fact from ASIO Chief Mike Burgess a few weeks ago. Since then, the pollies have all been protecting each other, one would think, and just letting it slide. Well, we're not. We still don't know who this traitor was. Albo needs to stop pretending this will all just fade away. He needs to name the accused. They need to be formally charged and tried and convicted and sent to jail for a very, very long time if they're found guilty. The second thing that you're not allowed to know about, according to the tyranny of Australia's elite political and judicial class, is that story from Melbourne about the alleged hate crime. A magistrate put an extraordinarily tight suppression order saying that we couldn't report on it. Well, we've got some good news on that front, thanks to a campaign to have the suppression order lifted that was spearheaded by Rebel News Australia and its chief reporter Avi Yemeni, and only then supported by the mainstream media. We can tell you some details about the case now, but only some it seems. The case surrounds an alleged kidnapping incident in which a 31-year-old man was taken from his car by a woman and another man and assaulted, allegedly because he worked for a Jewish boss. He isn't Jewish, he's a Muslim. He's alleging they attacked him because his boss was Jewish, because he worked for a Jewish boss in a Jewish-owned company. He says the attackers stole his iPhone and forced him to hand over the passcode by breaking one of his fingers with a hammer. Melbourne's Herald Sun newspaper reports it's alleged that the young Muslim man was told by the attackers that he had lost his faith and that the victim was so scared that the attackers would use the information on his phone against his boss that he called his boss from hospital and told him to lock all the IT in the business down. What makes this case extra troubling is that the alleged attackers are apparently quite high profile. The Herald Sun newspaper says the attack was allegedly carried out by, quote, a prominent female human rights advocate and a man who is a serial anti-Israel activist. Rebel News reports their names. The Herald Sun reports that it is still prevented from naming the accused due to that extraordinary suppression order from the magistrate. But it has detailed more of the alleged crime in its reporting. Now, our lawyers are telling us that we need to be safe and do as the Herald Sun is doing, so we won't be naming them either. But the newspaper does say that the attackers, a man and a woman, dragged the man out of his car in the northwest Melbourne suburb of St Albans at 9:30 p.m. and forced him into another vehicle where he was assaulted with a hammer. He was later found dumped in Braybrook with hand and facial injuries. The police in Victoria have categorically denied that this is a hate crime, saying that is not part of the case. Okay, well, time will tell. The accused will appear in court on May 31. So here's the thing. Violence or verbal attacks or intimidation and threats based on religious background or political beliefs have no place in this country, our country, Australia. Immigrants of the past 20 years or so do not have unique issues that immigrants of the previous 200 years didn't. But our ancestors didn't bring their problems with them. That's part of what it means to be Australian. And it's part of the deal of being allowed to become a permanent resident or citizen of this country. You can bring your culture with you, but you leave any troubles back home. If you want to keep playing out the wars that were the reason you left your homeland, then go home to do that. You don't bring that here. Otherwise, sorry, it's jail if you do something wrong or deportation for you. Aussies are getting sick and tired of this garbage, and we're losing patience with the left and their 50 years of diversity is always good nonsense. Diversity can be very good if it's diversity of peace, diversity of constructive ideas, innovation, growth, technology, and friendship. It can be very bad if it's diversity of cultures that don't share our core values, and it is not racist or wrong or unjust or unfair to say that, or for any country to demand a certain degree of assimilation and integration from its immigrants. The vast majority of immigrants to Australia do assimilate and integrate. The left would have us believe that the only racial hate crimes in Australia are from brain-dead neo-Nazi racist types against immigrants. But as ASIO chief Mike Burgess has said, that is not the big threat right now. Burgess said it is Sunni Islamic violent extremism that poses the, quote, greatest religiously motivated threat in Australia, unquote. In other words, it's ethnic tensions from other lands being brought into our country that poses the greatest race hate crime risks and terror risks to Australia. So again, you're welcome to immigrate to our country legally. We were built on immigration to a large extent, not fully, but to a large extent. But the deal is that there must be a sincere attempt to assimilate and integrate to some extent. And you've got to leave those homeland troubles back in your homeland. We like peace and non-violence and the rule of law here. Thanks. There'll probably be some left-wing nutjob's head exploding out there somewhere. You're a neo-Nazi racist. Yeah, no, sorry, not buying that BS anymore, kiddies. It is not racist to protect the peaceful nature of your own country and expect immigrants to require some assimilation. So we're done with your nonsense. All right, so on to our nuclear special today. Even I was totally blown away by the sheer terror in the eyes of the Aussie left and the renewables energy investors and lobbyists and PR people as they reacted to the radical proposal that, hey, gee, nuclear power might be a good, clean energy option. The discussion about nuclear has been around for ages, but the decision by the Liberal Party to grow a spine and push it harder has freaked out those whose political and business careers rely heavily on you buying into the climate change narrative and focusing totally on, let's face it, the very dirty and messy and very ugly energy alternatives of wind and solar. The king of the teals, the independents backed by the mysterious Climate 200 group, who are not a political party, do you hear me? They are independents, they are not a political party. They do not act like a political party, walk like a political party, talk like a political party, quack like a political party. No, they are independents. Anyway, the king of the teals, the founder is son of billionaire Robert Holmes à Court, Simon Holmes à Court, or Shack as we like to call him for short on social media. This week, Shack was so freaked out by the momentum that Peter Dutton's nuclear idea was gaining that he decided to come after a 17-year-old Queensland Year 12 student who supports it and was asking reasonable questions about it. That 17-year-old is Will Shackel, someone well known to many of you as the boy who ate up Energy Minister Chris Bowen for lunch on the ABC's Q&A show late last year. Let's take a look at a short clip from that episode of Q&A, shall we? This is the fun bit where Albo's Energy Minister Chris Bowen and Dutton's energy spokesman, Ted O'Brien, were discussing the cost of nuclear and, well, got schooled by the schoolboy.
$387 billion would be the cost to replace the coal-fired power in Australia with nuclear. That's an enormous amount of money. It's $25,000 per taxpayer if the taxpayer funded it, or indeed, those proponents would need to know they get their money back and they get it back from Australia.
Is that the cost? Do you agree?
Well, no, I don't, David. And I think the last time Minister Bowen released some economic modelling on Australia's energy system, it was to predict a $275 reduction in household power bills.
Well,
and we know where that went.
If that cost on nuclear power is wrong, what is the cost?
So it depends on which way you model it, David. You see, I think what's most important is to learn the lessons from overseas, where they say the most important method when it comes to an energy system planning is a total system cost. Because when we open up our bills at home, what we see is the total system cost in that bill. Now, it's only with that methodology that you can get the right mix of technologies, a balance of technologies in a grid to get the prices down.
Oh, sorry. Gee, you can see why they call Ted O'Brien ScoMo 2.0. He's about as inspiring and clear as they come, isn't he? Thank God the 17-year-old was there to teach him how to do media messaging and delivery.
Will is itching to get in here. Sorry, guys. Will.
The cost, this is clearly getting us nowhere. The cost of nuclear is clearly highly contentious. And you know what the best way to find out the cost of nuclear energy is? It's to lift the nuclear energy ban, because at that point, you can actually see nuclear reactors, what they will cost, because at this stage, no company is able to propose for nuclear reactors to be built in this country. And to what the Minister for Climate Change and Energy said about it being a distraction, well, look, we should have all options on the table. And what I would say is I'd bring out, this is the ban on nuclear energy. It's a single A4 piece of paper. And if the government was serious about reaching net zero and having a guaranteed path to net zero, well, they'd get rid of this. They'd get rid of this prohibition. And I think that is how you solve climate change. It's having all options on the table. That's how you end the climate wars. And I think it's particularly disappointing when I think everyone had great hope when the Prime Minister came out and said that this government would end the climate wars. And that's myself included. I was really optimistic for that. But when you look to a government which has prejudices against certain solutions, I think it's disingenuous to claim that the climate wars are ending. And, you know, I'm not going to let the coalition off it either, because, well, obviously the nuclear energy ban was introduced under the Howard government, like the Minister said. I think this should be a uniting issue around nuclear. The facts are in, you can see the global evidence, and I think it's time that at very least Australia considers lifting the ban on nuclear energy.
17-year-old Will Shackle just taking a day off school there to appear on Q&A and teach the Minister for Energy and his counterpart from the opposition some basic economics. Just get rid of the ban and let the market work out what the best options are. Investors are smart. They do their homework. They won't invest if it won't work. And if they do invest and it doesn't work, then they lose the money, not us. Government meddling in markets is a nightmare. All we need to do is let the free market work its magic and just lift the ban. Then no meddling politician or bureaucrat gets to push their agenda on behalf of their energy-invested mates. I really wish more people in Australia actually understood basic economics and how the free market actually works and why the free market works. A great way to fill in the gaps in our education left by our failing school system, like I had to, is to pick up any book by the American economics legend Thomas Sowell, S-O-W-E-L-L, Thomas Sowell, especially the one called Basic Economics. It's just one moronic debate after another every week in Australia because we're a nation of people who think the government has to control everything and fix everything. No, the government usually stuffs things up. We need small, light touch government to regulate things when the market fails or to prevent monopolies, one of the main failings of capitalism, which otherwise is an exceptionally good and fair economic system that creates massive collective wealth for people to share. But no, the government likes to meddle, and they tend to meddle because, to protect some mates who've got some investments in some other kind of technology perhaps, or protect some union mates perhaps, or give unfair advantage, dare we say it, to some. But of course, that's not happening in Australia, and I'd get sued if I said it was. So let me be very clear that I am not saying that. But that's the theory, anyway. Everyone in the wind and solar industry is totally nice. They are not like those evil fossil fuel people. The 17-year-old Aussie pro-nuclear energy activist Will Shackle asked this question on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, this week. The question was, why can't politicians explain why nuclear power is still illegal in Australia? Seems like a reasonable question to ask. Not according to our teal friend, Simon Holmes-a-Court. He reposted Will's question with this question of his own. Will Shackle, why do you keep saying Australia is the only country in the G20 that has banned nuclear? Germany and Italy are in the G20. Both have banned nuclear. The EU is in the G20. Multiple EU members have nuclear bans. Okay, fair comment, I guess, if it was true, but it isn't, as young Will pointed out to the middle-aged wind and solar fan. Let's take a look at the nutty, kooky, weird third world countries that have nuclear reactors and nuclear energy. Australia is the only member of the G20 with a ban on nuclear power, Will responded. Germany does not have a blanket ban on nuclear power. The construction of new nuclear power plants was made illegal in 2002. Germany could theoretically restart their nuclear power plants again legally, and many people are calling them to do so. They sure are. Germany has suffered a massive energy cost and supply crisis ever since. We'll come back to that in a moment. Will Shackle went on. Number two, Italy does not have a ban on nuclear power. 2 referendum results indirectly led to the destruction of the industry. And Will's point number 3 in his tweet, the European Union, not the individual countries, is a member of the G20, and they do not have a ban on nuclear power. So I made a comment to Simon that he seemed a little tense about this talk of nuclear power for a guy who seems to care so very, very much about the horrible planet-destroying effect of climate change. And he replied like this. Oops, not happy, Jan. Oh well, never mind, Simon. I'll give you another chance. There is a chair right beside me here in this set. You can come and sit in it any Friday you like, and I will let you make the case for why we should keep the nuclear ban. Absolutely free, no charge. You just have to get yourself here, or we can do it on Zoom. And I'll also invite Will into the studio. I'm sure you're not afraid of debating a 17-year-old, so, be my guest. Open invitation, anytime you like. This show is totally open to hearing you out. Fat chance that'll happen. There are some smart people on the left side of politics still, though, who are able to debate sensibly. One such person is this follower of mine on Twitter called Mike Lamb, who writes, as someone who is nominally on the left, the nuclear issue is the biggest reason why I don't trust the Greens on the environmental issue. Australia has some of the least risks in having a nuclear plant. If Ukraine can still operate 15 reactors currently, surely we can too. Well said, Mike. In fact, lots of countries have nuclear power and use it safely and effectively. So let's take Simon Holmes-a-Court's advice and look at Germany, shall we? Germany's own national broadcaster, Deutsche Welle, explores the question, did Germany make a mistake last year in shutting down its remaining nuclear plants?
The 15th of April 2023 marks the end of the over 60-year-old era of nuclear power in Germany. While the world is still reeling from an energy crisis, Germany decided to take its 3 remaining nuclear power plants off the grid and get out of nuclear energy for good.
And how's that one working out for you guys?
Have a look at this chart. This is how much renewable electricity was generated on a day in April 2022. First, you have the constant energy coming from hydropower, then biomass, offshore wind, onshore wind, and the big player on this day, solar. In 2022, on average, almost half of the electricity generated in Germany came from renewables. And the government wants to ramp that up to 80% by 2030. But what about the other 20%? And what do we do when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow?
Yes, what do we do when the sun doesn't shine, Deutsche Welle? What do we do?
The amount of electricity needed to compensate for that is called the residual load, and it fluctuates a lot during the day. To fill the gap, we would either need huge batteries to store the energy in peak times, which we're still far from having on a large enough scale, or we need power plants that we can shut on and off very flexibly. Right now, a lot of this flexible adjusting in Germany is done by gas plants, which can be turned on and off completely within just 30 minutes. But they, of course, also emit considerable emissions.
It takes about a day or two to start up and shut down a nuclear plant, so we'd still need gas for that flexibility that the system requires. But lots of people you might not expect see nuclear as a necessary part of the energy mix.
The International Energy Agency sees nuclear power as necessary to lower our emissions as fast as possible. And the IPCC also factors in a growth in nuclear power in most of its 1.5-degree scenarios. Large-scale nuclear power is likely not a long-term solution for Germany. When, or rather if, Germany ramped up renewables to 100%, and if energy could be stored efficiently, and if we had a perfect electricity grid, there would be no need for nuclear power in Germany. But that's just not the reality yet. And even environmentalists who are traditionally anti-nuclear criticize Germany's exit.
I feel that it's a mistake to close them down in order to focus on coal.
Wow, even her. So that's Germany. They have plants built already, you say, and they're thinking of ramping them back up. That's different to starting a brand new nuclear industry, as is being proposed by the Liberals for Australia? Well, yes, but nuclear power exists all over the world, and many countries are building new power plants.
Many other powerhouse nations are building new nuclear power plants, even Japan.
Another milestone in the commercialization of China's homegrown nuclear technology.
President Emmanuel Macron announced a plan to build up to 14 new nuclear power plants.
Nuclear power is the only carbon-free energy source we have that can deliver large amounts of power day and night.
Wow, even him. But let's look in a little more detail. Here's a chart from Statista based on data from the World Nuclear Industry Status Report 2022. At the top is the USA with 92 nuclear reactors. France coming in second there with 56, then China at 55, storming into third place, having added 44 nuclear reactors since 2011. Canada, India, the UK, Japan, Russia and South Korea all make the top 10. Such tin pot nations. The debate on Q&A turned to the question of disposing of nuclear waste, and it was time for Will Shackle to school the politicians again. But first, back to the Liberals' shadow energy minister, ScoMo 2.0. Sorry, I mean Ted O'Brien.
The minister sits on the National Security Committee, the peak body for our strategic defence in this country. He has given commitments to the United States and to the United Kingdom that we can effectively manage high-level nuclear waste. Here he is on national television saying that we can't. That is a serious concern.
And just because you can take...
Just very quickly, Will.
I very quickly have a word. I don't think the issue here is the science. The issue here is politics. I think that's really clear. We have the solutions of how to manage spent fuel, high-level waste around the world. And I think it's a shame we're still having these discussions and fear-mongering about high-level waste spent fuel, because I'm sure they wouldn't be having these discussions in France or in all of the other countries around the world which are able to successfully manage nuclear waste. And it's not an issue to them. But for some reason, it is here in Australia. And I think that says a lot about our politics today.
That is gold. It sure does. Will Shackle joins me now. Will, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you're in the middle of exams right now.
I am, but thanks for having me on.
Great to have you on. So, Will, you mentioned in that session on Q&A that it's really pointless talking about whether there's a business case or a financial case or not for nuclear, that the government just needs to get on and lift the ban so that the free market, that investors will decide and business will decide whether or not it's viable, right, pretty quickly.
Yeah, the government has no way of knowing how much a nuclear reactor will cost or how long one would actually take to build without having the bans across Australia lifted. Australia is one of the most hostile nations towards nuclear power, so no nuclear power company is going to put all of their time and all of their energy into trying to convince our government when they've made it really, really clear that they don't want it already by having one of the strongest bans across the world in place, not only prohibiting the construction of nuclear power reactors, but in addition to that, prohibiting multiple other stages of the nuclear fuel cycle, such as, managing the waste associated with nuclear power plants, or even refining the uranium in terms of enriching it to make sure that it's suitable for the reactors to be able to fuel the fission process. So the government if they want to be making the arguments that nuclear energy is too expensive and takes too long to build, then they should put that to the test. And by doing that, that means lifting the bans on nuclear energy, because that's the only way we'll actually know if nuclear power stacks up.
If we had really smart government too, we'd be looking at a broader industry here. Like you say, I mean, Australia's perfectly positioned for safe nuclear. Because we've got so much space, we're perfectly positioned to be a great place to process and refine spent nuclear fuel. There's all sorts of opportunities here for Australia, isn't there, in terms of business and growth? But we just lack that vision, don't we?
Well, look, Australia is already a nuclear nation, and we are regarded around the world for our nuclear science capabilities. You look to ANSTO and their Lucas Heights facility 30 kilometres away from the Sydney CBD, where we've got a research reactor producing things that are used across the world. We export so many nuclear medicines around the world. We're able to produce silicon, which is needed for even things like renewables. So we're regarded for our nuclear sciences around the world. We've got the largest uranium reserves in the world. We're about to have floating nuclear reactors as part of our AUKUS submarines, which the government is going to be spending hundreds of billions of dollars on. So at that point, they've conceded that nuclear power is safe and that they're willing to actually manage the waste as a result of nuclear power. But so far, the contradiction basically is that they're willing to manage all of that for nuclear reactors based in the water, floating around all of our major cities and everything like that. But they're not comfortable with those nuclear reactors being on land, which is where the debate really emerges. So whilst the government acknowledges the role of nuclear science and, curing people of cancer through nuclear medicines and being used in advanced manufacturing processes with the work that ANSTO does, and in addition to that, using nuclear sciences for the benefit of our national security, they can't seem to realise that nuclear science could also have tremendous applications for our energy security, especially at a time where we're not on track to reach our emissions targets, and it looks increasingly likely that if we follow our current path of 100% renewables, that the lights will inevitably go out. And that's just simply, we deserve better as a nation than having energy, being energy insecure. We should, at very, very least, we should have an expectation in this country that regardless of what happens, the lights stay on. And given the government cannot guarantee that, they need to be able to consider all energy options, and therefore they must be considering nuclear power as well.
Now, Will, you care about the environment. Kids your age obviously are very concerned. You've got to live with this future where where these projections are suggesting that we might have a warming planet. What's your take on the wind and solar? I like to call it wind and solar rather than renewables. Renewables sounds a little too nice.
Yep.
They are land-intensive forms of energy, right? What's your take on wind and solar, and what is the appropriate balance, do you think, the appropriate mix that Australia should be looking at, given how much research you've done into this?
Look, first of all, I'm a 17-year-old, so I should not be the one designing Australia's future.
Fair
green.
enough.
I
That was a big question.
Specifically on trying to lift the bans on nuclear power so we can have an all options on the table approach, which I think is really important. But in terms of what I think in terms of, solar and wind, I think it's inevitable that they will probably still play a leading role in our energy transition, and I think that's a good thing. I think nuclear should complement those solar panels and those wind turbines, but that's not forgetting the fact that no energy source is perfect. Nuclear power is not perfect, and certainly solar and wind is not perfect either. Literally nuclear power is actually safer than wind turbines statistically for one point. Obviously, solar panels, wind turbines have a major effect on the environment and also, displacing people from agricultural lands, even Indigenous communities. So there is that issue in terms of renewables, whether it be with the transmission, extra poles and wires and transmission infrastructure they require, or the direct land footprint required for all of these vast solar farms and wind turbines. That's certainly an issue that needs to be addressed. And I think there needs to be more done to ensure that communities are actually consulted and that these projects aren't at the detriment of those communities. But overall, I think that Australia needs to be considering all clean energy options if we want to have any chance of addressing climate change. And I don't, honestly, what I would say is, firstly, there's two angles to the environment. First of all, there's the fact that nuclear power is better for the environment from a land footprint and materials usage point of view as compared to fossil fuels, but also solar panels and wind turbines. But in addition to that, it's also one of the cleanest forms of energy in terms of addressing climate change. So if the government wants to be serious about acting on climate change and wants to be serious in reaching net zero, the only guaranteed path to actually do that is when you consider nuclear power. And we've seen that around the world. So not only is nuclear power beneficial for the environment from the land footprint and materials standpoint, but it's also hugely beneficial in addressing climate change.
Will, what is the mood among people your own age now? I mean, obviously millennial-aged older kids are kind of, pretty well, one-eyed when it comes to this stuff, if I dare say it. You're seeing a bit of a shift in your age group, are you, with the way kids are viewing the whole energy mix and climate change threat and everything?
Yeah, and I think that was evident in the latest news poll, which showed that 2/3 of my generation actually supported nuclear power. And that's what I'm seeing anecdotally. I think, the thing about young people is that they support the science and they can see the science that nuclear power is a safe, low carbon and energy secure option for Australia. And when they see that evidence presented to them, they're naturally inclined to be supportive of nuclear power. So I think young people are some of the strongest, can be some of the strongest champions for nuclear power. That's certainly what I'm trying to do through my campaign, Nuclear for Australia. We've got, now 20,000 people who are behind us and are supporting Nuclear for Australia in what we're doing. So that's excellent, a grassroots impact that we're able to achieve. In terms of the other things in regards to how young people just broadly see the energy debate, I think obviously young people do care a lot about climate change, but the real thing is, and this is what politicians I think have failed to understand, is not only do they want action on climate change, but they actually want politicians to tell them how they're going to actually act to lower emissions. And up until now, I think politicians have taken it for granted, I think they sort of are in a mind space where if they think that they can just tell young people they'll do everything in their power to address climate change without actually saying to young people the specific solutions that they actually have. And that's what young people are really looking for, is solutions to these big issues we face, whether it is climate change, whether it is the energy security issues it looks like Australia will face in the future, even if it's, the cost of living crisis that young people are going to have to inherit with that rising energy bills and all of those issues. So young people want solutions, and when they see a solution like nuclear power, which is both clean, reliable and proven around the world to lower power bills, it's something that, naturally most young people are going to get behind.
Well, Will, I hope that your generation are a little bit more sceptical and demanding of the details, because it's so easy for all sides of an argument to just spin an argument, and you don't really get to the truth unless you do get to the details. We better let you go and get back to your study. What's the plan for Will Shackle after school? You're in Year 12 now. Where are you heading after? Are you going to go to politics?
Probably not.
Okay.
I think I'll be going to university first and making sure that I get good grades at the end of this year, at end of Year 12 for me. That's probably the priority at the moment, besides from pushing this nuclear power cause and sharing information with people about the potential benefits nuclear power could have in Australia. So I've got a lot on my plate. And like you said, I will actually be studying straight after this one. But yeah, thanks again for having me on.
Absolute pleasure, Will. You can come on the show anytime, absolutely anytime you like. Tell everybody about the website and the petition.
Yep, so if people support nuclear power and specifically support the bans on nuclear power being lifted, I'd encourage them to go to nuclearforaustralia.com/petition or head to one of our pages on social media to find the link there, to sign the petition and to add their name to the tens of thousands of people across Australia calling for the government to lift the bans on nuclear power.
That's Will Shackle. We need more young Australians like him, that's for sure. And any university that's got half a brain, if we have any left in this country, should be chasing this kid down with a scholarship right away. We'll come back in just a moment. Right now, we've got Ben Beattie in the studio. Ben is the other side's energy guru, electrical engineer, and creator and host of the Baseload Podcast, which is truly based. Ben, welcome back to the show. Great to have you here to make sense of all this for us.
Thanks, Damian.
First question, obvious question: can Australia do it? I mean, in 10 years, do you really think we could get nuclear up and running by then in some capacity?
If we're optimistic, you'd have to say yes, of course. Australia is an advanced economy. We have a democracy. We have a bureaucracy. When we put it to good use, it can do good things.
We're a massive bureaucracy.
Yeah, we could maybe add a little bit to it for a nuclear department, maybe. There might be some complaining about that. But I think, no, Australia could definitely build a big industrial facility in a decade. There's pieces around the regulations. There's pieces around the supply chain. But if you want to do it, you can do it. I mean, it's going to take a lot longer to build Snowy 2.
Right, okay. So compared to renewables, which I think we really should start calling unreliables, or land destroyers, land consumer technology, because it really does scar the environment. Wind and solar. It's nothing nice and pleasant about it environmentally, but compared to wind and solar, do you think nuclear? I mean, the coalition are talking about putting nuclear reactors at where present coal plants are, right? So if they did that, that would have much less environmental damaging impact.
Yeah, of course. If you build highly dense energy sources, you don't need the widely distributed and low density energy sources. And this is the great fear of the renewables industry. If the renewables industry has to compete with investment and market share and even, dare we say, government subsidies with a nuclear industry, and if they're both meant to give us zero emissions, but one's going to be there for 80 years per site, whereas renewables are going to be there for 20 years per site and then soak up some more land, you'd have to say that people will tend to go with the nuclear. And that's an obvious response. And the sooner we get to these more adult conversations, the better.
Yeah. So is it feasible to put them in the coal plants, where the coal plants are?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So the existing coal facilities in Australia, the ones that are left, there's 3 in Victoria, 4 in New South Wales, and 8 in Queensland. And that's all we're talking about. They already come with, obviously, an electricity connection, a high-capacity electricity connection. A lot of them have rail of some sort. They've obviously got heavy-duty roads, because you can't build a large baseload power station without roads. And if you're trying to get something big into an area to build it, something heavy that takes several trucks worth to get in, like transformers, turbines, and that sort of thing, you need the right route. So bridges have to be reinforced to do this. So these power stations have all that infrastructure already in place.
Transmission lines.
The transmission lines are
That's
critical.
the big one, right?
Well, we're going to be talking about transmission lines in this segment, but the existing transmission lines should be used as much as possible to get the most value out of them. And the only way you can do that is to reuse them. What we're talking about with the renewables, putting the distributed, these small capacity, to be honest, power stations out in the wilderness, the natural wilderness, and building new transmission lines, everything's going to be underutilised and cost a lot more, to be honest, and upset a lot of farmers too.
Okay, it doesn't seem to make sense, but Chris Bowen, the climate energy minister, whatever he's called, he's got pretty firm plans and a pretty firm commitment to the wind and solar land consuming technology. You saw him on the Insiders, on the ABC's Insiders this week. Let's have a quick look at a clip from that interview where Chris Bowen was basically asked about the opposition's claim that these nuclear plants could be built within 10 years.
You might have just heard the opposition says experts are telling them you could have a nuclear power plant up and running within 10 years in Australia. Is that right?
Tell him he's dreaming. I mean, I don't know what experts he's talking to. I mean, I just heard you talking about Europe's experience. I could point to the United States' experience. The United States, with a very developed regulatory regime, with a very developed nuclear industry, the nuclear leader of the world. The average build time of a nuclear power plant in the United States has been 19 years. Ted O'Brien thinks you can do it in Australia from 10 with a standing start, with no regulations, with it banned not only nationally but in the 3 most populous states. I mean, throw in the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge and you might sell him something.
He's a comedian. 19 years, is that reasonable?
Well, Mr. Bowen's pointing to projects which have been built in America since basically not long after World War II.
Okay, so the average is 19 years over all that time.
And you'd like to think that in this day and age where we have 3D modelling, computer-aided design, we have advanced materials, and we have proper manufacturing and unions even who would get on board, hopefully, you'd think that we could improve that a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So the idea that it would be 19 years is pushing it a little bit. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously...
Mr. Bowen often complains about his opposition and the media and commentators cherry picking, but that's exactly what he's doing here.
All right. Let's take a look at another clip from that interview when Spears asks about the nuclear ban. And he basically says to Bowen, you know, if the ban is, if the cost of building these things is so prohibitive and so expensive, then why do you even need to have a ban?
If the idea of nuclear energy is so prohibitively expensive, takes too long, why do we need the ban at all?
Well, David, I hear this argument about, I'll just lift the ban and let the market sort it out. Well, the market hasn't sorted it out in any other country in the world. Every country in the world with nuclear has required massive transfers of taxpayer wealth to the nuclear constructors. Now, if we were to go down that road in Australia, we'd really be sending the signal that we're prepared to do that we are prepared to use taxpayers' money to subsidise the development of the nuclear industry. And we're not.
Just in fairness, though, Minister, you do. I mean, the government's building Snowy 2.0. You have the scheme, the capacity investment scheme that subsidises renewables. We don't know how much that's costing.
Well, very different approaches. I mean, you look at now the opposition has scrapped their small modular reactor policy after we've been telling them for 2 years there is no such thing as a small modular reactor. They've scrapped it and gone for large. The poster child of large nuclear reactors is Hinkley C in the United Kingdom, which is very, very late and has come in at $86 billion for a just over 3 gigawatt nuclear power plant. Now, coal in Australia is about 22 gigawatts. Do the maths. I mean, this is eye-watering amounts of government taxpayer subsidy that would be required to make this stack up. Maybe Peter Dutton's prepared to do that. We're not.
Okay, that's Chris Bowen, the Energy Minister, speaking on ABC Insiders this week. Ben, he made a couple of points there. I just want to go through them and get your responses to them one at a time. The first one was that the free market hasn't sorted it out. That, in fact, where nuclear is happening, it has required massive subsidies. Is that the case? What's your response to that?
I think that he's made a reasonable point, but what he's done is he's taken it out of context. If he was going to be fair, he would also say that the renewable sector only exists because of subsidies. And I would say to Mr. Bowen, let's open the field to all the technologies. I mean, if we can't have an adult conversation about getting rid of subsidies and incentives and targets altogether, well, at least let's let nuclear compete for the same subsidies that renewables currently do.
Well, let's talk about subsidies for a minute, because renewables energy has enormous subsidies, the renewables industry. Would the subsidies for nuclear, and again, this might not be something you can answer, but I mean, is it likely that the subsidy required for nuclear would be more than is required for wind and solar?
I think if we did it badly, yes, it would. But I think we need to, like I said, coming back to a theme tonight of having adult conversations about this stuff. So we're talking about first of a kind in Australia, but not so much first of a kind in the world. Something else Mr. Bowen said was that Hinkley C is the poster child of the nuclear industry. Well, it's not actually. The power stations built in United Arab Emirates, the most recent one coming online a couple of weeks ago. Now, they've built 4.
This is a large nuclear reactor?
Yep. They've built 4 of them in the last 15 years. So I don't see why, if they can't do it, we can't do it. Now, the subsidy question is always going to be raised. I think that nuclear in Australia will need some subsidies, but I think the benefits of nuclear power will pay back those subsidies many times over. So if we're talking about getting very cheap electricity for 80 years per site, that's something to consider. And there's always a place for subsidies. Bringing new technology into the market is one of those places. The place where subsidies shouldn't be used is to disadvantage existing technologies to the extent where it becomes unprofitable and costs the economy a lot of money and costs people a lot of money.
Right. So you could effectively have an open market with fair, equitable subsidies offered, right? And then let them compete and see which technology is the best. But investors will work that out. I mean, they're not going to sink the money into projects that aren't going to work. So the point is that if he just lifts the ban, then we might get some people knocking on the door saying, hey, let's do a nuclear project in Australia. They'll do the sums, they'll do the research, they'll do the due diligence, they'll work out whether they think they can make it profitable. And then they'll come to the government and say, okay, we would require this level of subsidy. And then you can make it you can make an adult, as you say, an adult decision.
Well, Damian, this would be
this
would be the conversation to have to get rid of the ban and say, well, let's do it. But like I said before, I think the renewables industry is frightened of that conversation because it means that they will tend to disappear out of the system over time.
So as Will Shackle says, this is getting very political, right? It's really just about politics. And I would dare to say that perhaps there's a little bit of protectionism going on of certain technologies over others. So wind and solar over nuclear.
Well, definitely. When the government makes a target for a particular sector, they're making promises. And if Mr. Bowen's fond of his euphemisms, I'd say, well, let's stop making promises that you can't cash.
Yeah. Okay. So the second part of that was he said the opposition scrapped its small modular nuclear reactor policy. There's no such thing. We've been telling them there's no such thing as a small modular nuclear reactor for ages, and they finally accepted it and gone for large nuclear reactor technology. Okay, but before we just accept that, is it a dream? Is it a pipe dream? Is it nonsense to talk about small modular nuclear reactors, this new technology with the easier to build, faster to build?
No, SMRs are coming. Canada's looks like they're going to be the first ones. It's not going to happen overnight, but everyone can understand the logic of modularized technology, like cars, for example.
Of course, makes it faster and quicker and easier to build.
The quality gets better, the tolerances get tighter, everything works better, and obviously the costs come down when you can mass produce something or effectively mass produce something. Now, I'd take issue with Mr. Bowen saying that the LNP's policy was SMRs. I think their policy was pretty much just to repeal the existing bans as far as they can, because they've got the federal government and you've got all the states to deal with as well. I think SMRs became a sort of a catchphrase and was cherry-picked a little bit.
Okay.
I would dare to say that it was smart for the coalition to raise SMRs as the bright new thing in nuclear, because that's I think we were talking in the car up here and we've said that the conversation has changed, the needle has turned a bit, and I think when you and Will's quite good on this, Will Shackle, about the polls and the public interest. He's all across that data, and it's really interesting to see how that needle is turning. And if the LNP or Ted and Peter and co used the allure of SMRs to turn that needle, I think that's perfectly valid.
Well, let's talk about the public's main concern about nuclear, which is, it's a bit scary. There's the fear of a nuclear event and the implications of that. Obviously, when you talk about a smaller reactor, people think, well, that's not going to be as dangerous if anything goes wrong. But they're all pretty safe. The technology is actually pretty safe now. You were mentioning Fukushima.
Yeah, well, if you look at what's happened around the world, and you said, okay, everyone, it's pretty much common knowledge or household language, Chernobyl, Fukushima, and even maybe 3 Mile Island. But if you try and dig a bit deeper and find out, are there any more nuclear accidents around, you start coming up dry. So the next stage is to go, well, how many people have died from nuclear accidents and what's the effect been? And what can be done about that? Well, Chernobyl was a long time ago, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. There was a Netflix series or a TV show recently which dramatised it quite a lot. But the people who I talked to about that basically snorted at it in derision and said that was very dramatised and hyped. That when you've got an old technology in, say, the old Soviet Union, and all the problems that come with communism and the chain of command.
Oh, like the fact that you don't tell your boss when something's breaking because you don't want to get into trouble.
Just cover over it and paper over it, yeah.
And one of the best things about socialism and communism.
Hopefully the shift will change before the bad things happen.
Yeah.
So all that stuff there, and then and people are now going on tours there now. Okay, so that Chernobyl's a bad one. Fukushima, a nuclear accident in some sense caused by an earthquake tidal wave. But from my understanding, Fukushima, the power station itself, was one of the oldest and was planning to be shut down not long afterwards anyway. And the fact that no one actually died of the radiation from that event.
They had to vacate a number of towns, but it wasn't. There wasn't
a lot of it was just in case, not because of everyone's dropping dead with radiation poisoning.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot made of that by the media and by the anti-nuclear lobby, of which there's quite a lot of them around. But in terms of reality and practicality, nuclear is very safe.
Okay. Want to talk to you about that Hinkley C reactor that he was mentioning in the UK that you raised. He said it came in very late. It cost $86 billion. It provided 3 gigawatts of power. We have to replace in Australia baseload coal power of about 22 gigawatts, so we would need 7 or 8 Hinkleys. Is that right? So,
well, if
7 or 8 times 86 billion. Oh, it's small change the way the Australian government spends money these days. But it is getting up towards the trillion mark. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
We wouldn't build a Hinkley size reactor in Australia. One of the difficulties of being a small grid, we are, in terms of economy, in terms of electricity, energy consumed, we're a very small player in the world. When you're talking about a massively interconnected region like UK and Europe, you can afford to build big, large 1,000 megawatt units and multi-1,000 megawatt units because you've got the demand there to meet it. And your 1,000 megawatt generator.
That's a gigawatt, right?
It is a gigawatt. Yep. You've got the units right. Well done. Not bad for a Bachelor of Arts, Damian. But when you're talking about the size of individual units on the grid, too big becomes a problem. So the biggest we have in Australia is in Cogan Creek in Queensland. That's 750. And if you think about what the market operator who runs the grid from moment to moment, they consider the risk of that falling over and tripping off. So there has to be enough sitting around to make up the difference if it goes away. And that's a spinning reserve, not available in wind and solar, by the way. There's no spinning reserve in wind and solar. You can't turn it up if you need it all of a sudden. But too big a unit can add cost. So we're looking at smaller units, and there are smaller units around 400, 600 megawatts, which work well for us. And obviously they're cheaper to build, smaller to build, take less time.
Now, you would argue we still need some coal, right? Because we've got to have that baseload reliability that you can turn on and off quickly, because you can't turn nuclear on and off quickly either.
You can't turn
wind and solar, right?
You can't turn coal on and off quickly either. You can turn it down a bit, and you'll find that coal has a minimum to do with the air-fuel ratios and how much fuel you can blow in with the air. So there's some technical reasons around that.
Follow it? He's lost me. Yeah, go on.
We'll get the whiteboard out later.
Can you turn it up or down?
It'll be fine. within limits you can, and it does quite a good job, as it's done in Australia for 50 years or longer. And people who say that coal's slow to ramp, well, yes, it is on the extremities, but to deal with the daily fluctuations, it's perfectly fine to do that. It can do that all day, all night, and that's reasonable. What it can't do is turn off in the middle of the day because there's nowhere to put the electricity because of all the rooftop solar panels that have been forced into the market.
Oh, right. Okay.
You can't over-generate the electricity because you've got nowhere to put it. And
over-generation.
The physics doesn't allow it. the economics doesn't like it, but you know, you can subsidise the economics out of the way, but the physics, and you can't subsidise the physics out of the way.
No. The left can get rid of economics, but they can't get rid of physics. It really annoys them. They would if they could, I'm sure. Ben, for all the technical stuff, people can listen to you on the Baseload podcast and go and dive a bit deeper if your megawatts and gigawatts are up to a bit higher standard than mine and your understanding's a bit higher standard than mine. Tell people how to find the Baseload
podcast.
That's the one.
That is. So I chose Baseload because I figured that would describe my niche accurately.
Yeah.
So the Baseload podcast on all your iTunes, Spotify, etc. Thank you.
All right. Ben Beattie, thanks very much for joining us once again, our energy guru here on the other side. And that is all we have time for this week on The Other Side Australia. If you're watching this before Saturday night, please vote wisely in the local council elections, Queenslanders. Watch out for communists posing as environmental candidates, okay? Follow us on Twitter, TikTok and Instagram at Other Side Oz, that's AUS. And please smash the like and subscribe and every other button and all the platforms that you possibly can. And please make comments. All of that helps with the magical algorithms that control us all. Of course, the best place to join us is on ADH TV at adh.tv on any web browser, and it's absolutely free. And then you get all our other great content. Fred Paul, David Flint, Alexandra Marshall, Daisy Cousins, Spectator TV, Nick Cater, Church and Stay with Dave Pallow, and all the special events that are up there for you to watch on demand as well. We'll catch you next weekend for The Other Side. We drop a new show every Friday night at 8 p.m. on ADH. I'm Damian Curry. Bye for now.